G'day everyone. A number of people have been asking me to post a video about the settings that I use in my a7 III, so I've decided to do that for you now. Just be aware that a lot of the settings, like the focusing modes and everything else, I will be expanding in separate videos later on down the track. So let's have a look at my settings now.
Okay, so what we're going to do is just go through the menus one at a time. Some of them are specific just to video, whereas others are related just to JPEG or RAW shooting. So we'll start looking through these anyway. Now the file format that I choose to shoot is RAW plus JPEG. If you click in here, you can see that you could just shoot RAW or also JPEG if you like. I like to actually shoot RAW onto the faster card and then JPEG onto the second card. So that's how I'm actually setting that dialog box up. The file format is compressed. I honestly have not noticed any difference. Some other people may differ in that, but I just like to use compressed, save a little bit of size, and I haven't noticed any difference when I've shot compressed or uncompressed. Like I said, other people may differ and want to shoot uncompressed. If you actually are after the ultimate quality and probably even a little bit better performance, you should shoot uncompressed because it's not having to do anything to that file when you capture the image. But I'm happy with just using compressed and saving some file size. JPEG quality through here, I always use extra fine. I want the best quality JPEG I can get. And the JPEGs are only for my backup, but from the shoots that I've done so far with this camera, the JPEGs actually are excellent. The color science looks really good. I would be actually quite confident just shooting JPEG on this, but I will still use RAW because I like the extra control later on, and also the extra lift I can give in shadows and things. JPEG file size, I'm choosing the largest one here as well. Again, I'm just getting the best quality JPEG I can get out of the file size. Aspect ratio, I am choosing 3:2. If you were dealing just for shooting for video, well then you could obviously use 16:9, but I'm dealing with doing stills and video, so I shoot at 3:2, and then if I have to for the video, I just crop them down. And then obviously if you're going to do super APS-C 35mm mode here, you can just turn this on and then just shoot it on. You can have it on auto if you connect a APS-C lens. The second that you put that lens on, it will change to super 35 mode. Sometimes though I do like to disable that, because if I'm putting something like the 10 to 18mm, well, I don't want that to go into Super 35 because I can shoot from 12 to 16 with that lens. So I turn the auto APS-C lens off. Let's go on to the next page. Long exposure. Now all of the noise reduction algorithms I turn off because to be honest, I prefer to do all of my noise reduction in Lightroom or in Photoshop, so that's basically, I will always turn them off. High ISO is the same, that's turned off. Color space, I'm on sRGB. If you are doing your own in-house printing, you can use Adobe RGB because the CMYK printers that they're using there with the inks do have a larger gamut, so you can do that. If you're going like I do and getting your prints done by a photographic studio, most of them will be using sRGB, so I just shoot in sRGB. And remember, this is only related to the JPEG too. This won't be baked into the RAW file, but in case if I want to use a JPEG, I'll just shoot in sRGB. And then I will convert the file obviously in Adobe Lightroom or Photoshop to sRGB, but I am shooting sRGB there. Lens compensation we don't need to touch, there's no reason to adjust that. The Sony cameras really don't have back focus issues and things like that, so you shouldn't need to ever touch that. Drive mode is, at the moment it's on continuous shooting. If you want to obviously shoot single shooting, you would use this one. In yesterday's shoot I was doing quite a bit of continuous shooting, so I had it on high. Now you have got high, you've also got mid as well, and low, depending on how much images you want to actually capture. Your timer there, that is often quite handy, and I do use that quite a bit if you want to do run into the shot yourself. There's other times where I'll use it even if I'm doing macro. Sometimes if I don't want to be holding the camera, I'll set the timer there as well. And then you have things like bracketing and all other things that you can do through this dialog box as well. That's what your bracket settings are as well. To be honest, I very rarely ever bracket. I don't do bracketing at all, but you can change your bracketing here if you like. I've found the dynamic range now of the Sony cameras, I just don't need to really do it anymore. Memory, I'll go through on another video soon, because I'll talk to you about what I set up in my memory slots. And the selected media here, I actually use slot 1 as the selected media because that's the fastest slot. So I have that set as slot 1. Let's go to the next one. Register custom shooter settings. You can actually set the camera to have specific settings to a certain custom button. So for instance, if you were working in a dark room, but then you also had to rush outside and do something that was brighter or faster moving, you could have separate settings for each of those shoots, and you can actually set that through here, and you can basically work out which button you're going to set it to, and then you can set everything. Basically you can go through things like, you know, shoot mode, drive mode, exposure compensation. There's so many things you can actually set through these controls. So I'm going to quit out. I haven't set that up yet on the camera though. Focus mode, it will basically get an exposure once. Now I'm not sure whether you can hear that click. So that's getting your single shot done. If I click onto AFA, AFA will choose whether you are moving or whether it's static. So it sort of switches between both as it's needed. To be honest, I don't use that setting. I'm always using AFS or AFC. Now AFC, if you'll notice, it just moves around without it clicking, so it's continuous focus. So that's the advantage of AFC. If something's moving, or you think it's going to be moving, well then obviously you'll use AFC. The other focus mode inside there too is DMF. DMF will give you single spot focus, but then if you started to actually move in manual, you can then actually use manual focus just by turning the focus wheel on your camera, which is really good actually, because if you want to basically make sure your exposure is dead on, you can have focus peaking turned on. I haven't got that turned on yet, but that's a really useful focus mode, and I do use that quite a bit too. Or you can just obviously just go straight to manual focus, and the second that I turn the focus wheel, I can then expose or bring it into focus. And because this enlarges so much, you know, it's just fantastic, because you can get focusing is very easy with these Sony cameras, really easy. So let me just go back to AFS, and we'll go back onto the menu. These priority set AFS and AFC is basically you can determine whether you can take whether the AF has the priority, whether the shutter has the priority. I always use balance emphasis because it uses a mixture of balance of both of those. So with both of these settings, I'm using balanced emphasis. Focus area, basically when you're looking at this is wide at the moment. It'll just basically determine what it wants to put in focus. And that's often the one that I will use. If you want to go for zone, you can then set areas. You'll notice if I move the joystick across, it will then focus on certain areas, like that will get inside that zone now. It'll always stay on that left-hand side. If I wanted to move it up, it will then focus more on the top part there. It's really quite useful. So if you had a bride that was walking down the right-hand side of the aisle, well then you could set that zone over into that area. So it is a really useful focus area, that one. Center, I do use an awful lot, to be honest, when I'm on a gimbal. So this is the one that I would use when it's stuck on a gimbal, and I'll just keep the bride dead center, and that will just basically focus everything just on that center point. And I really like that setting for gimbal work. Sometimes, obviously, if you want to go a little bit off center, well, then you'd have to use zones, which I just showed you a minute ago. Another area there is flexible spot. Flexible spot is sort of coming off the older digital SLR type cameras, where you can move to something in focus by using the joystick. You can also use the touch screen as well if you want to, and then obviously that will stay in focus as well. So that's another really good focus area that I use. Expandable flexible spot is very similar. It's just that it will, if it can't get that focus on the exact point you've got, it'll use the outside areas to gain focus. So so I suppose you could say it's a little bit less accurate, but if you are struggling to get focus, you can use that expandable flexible spot. Okay, so the next mode I'll show you is this one. This is a really good mode. It's Lock On AF. This is a great mode, and it's very accurate. I'm actually using this all the time now to track brides walking down aisleways and things like that. It really is great. Now all you do is basically, once you've selected it, you then click onto the object that you want to actually be in focus. So say for instance I've grabbed the light over there, well then you'll notice then it just tracks it. So it's very good. Now if it had a face, it would track the face. It can also pull boxes around areas if they're moving and things like that. It's a great feature. It's really good. And I use that all the time in stills mode. It's not available in video mode though. You have to just use the Lock On AF in that mode, but yeah, that works great. So they're the focus modes. Just I'll put it back onto wide, and then we'll keep moving on. Focus settings, there's nothing you can change in there. This dialog box down here, you can have it off AF point only or AF point plus AF area. Basically it means the focus settings work the same if you have it in horizontal and vertical. So I always have that set on. AF illuminator you always want on because you want to see what's actually in focus. Lock On AF basically is if I turn that on and I wanted to track that light again, if I click the focus point on that, you'll see it'll track it. It's just not as good as the other focusing that I use. This is more of an older technology, so I tend to not use that as much as I will use the other follow focus mode. Set face priority in AF. Basically, I have both of those on, and what it means is, well, it'll actually set, if you have it, say, on your aperture priority and things like that, it actually balances your the exposure and things to the face, so it actually helps in face tracking. And here we have AF track sensitivity, so you can set your separate how fast you want the tracking sensitivity here. Obviously 5 is very responsive, so if you were doing things like a very fast running runner coming towards you, you may want to use responsive. The only thing what you've got to watch though is if you the faster that you actually put these on, it can lose that subject easier. The slower you actually do it, even if they go off frame and come back in, it will sort of keep that lock on. It'll try to keep that lock on. I generally keep it as standard, but just be aware that those settings are there if you want them. AF with shutter, I turn that off because I'm using back button focus, and I will show you my button settings in another video. Pre-focus AF, I turn that off. I just don't need it. It'll actually try and focus before you've even hit the focus button, but I do turn that off. AF area register means it will reset the area if you have that on every time you turn it back on. I don't have that. I just leave it off. I'm not interested in it. I'll just move it with the joystick or whatever. You can just click in the center of the joystick if you're using a lot of these focus modes and, for instance, flexible spot, and it will jump back to the beginning, or to the center, I should say, of the LCD. That this one here, delete reg AF area, basically will delete settings, because you can set it where it will always start, so you can delete that as well. This next one is the same thing, so it's just not relevant to me. I just don't use it. And again, you can reset your EV compensation every time the camera turns off, and I don't like that. I actually prefer to just have it set with the dialogue wheel up the top of the camera. So ISO, you can set your ISO through this dialog box. Metering mode, you've got your multi-metering mode here. There's center weighted, there's spot weighted if you say doing something backlit or whatever, you wanted to actually focus directly on something. Entire screen averaging. There's also a highlight protection here as well. If you put this onto highlight and you had a bride out in the sun, it will meter for that bride's dress, so you can use that if you'd like to do that as well. I've found, to be completely honest, the way that I'm shooting, I'm always using multi, because I can see what I'm getting inside the screen anyway, and I just adjust the screen to get the result that I want. I do change it sometimes if it's really heavily backlit, and I'll use that standard. I very rarely use the other these other metering modes, because I can just see what I'm getting on the screen anyway, and I'm using zebras, so I'll talk about that in a minute. So I'm generally just leaving it on multi. Face priority, this is where actually face priority and multimeter, this is the one that actually meters for your face. If you want to leave that on, it will check to make sure the face is exposed. That's the most important part. Spot metering point, you can have center or focus point link. I always just leave that on center. Exposure step, you can change your exposure step to 0.5 or 0.3. I leave mine on 0.3. I like that bit more control. AEL with shutter, I just have that set with on, so it's automatic. And exposure set adjust, I don't do that at all. I think it tells you if you try to go in that it will change the optimum exposure. So you're basically changing what the camera thinks is the correct exposure in the meters, so you're going to change that, and I don't want to adjust that. Flash mode, you have all the different flash modes through here that you can have. Flash off, obviously, auto, fill flash, slow, rear, depending on what type flash you want, whether you want it to fire at the beginning, at the end, or just have fill flash. In this case, I'm just having it on fill. Flash compensation, that's where you can turn your flash compensation up or down to adjust that. This exposure compensation, you can determine whether you want to alter the flash with the exposure compensation to affect the ambient and the flash, or just ambient only. I sometimes change between the two of them, to be honest, but at the moment I'm just leaving it on ambient and flash. I might go through that another time with you all. Because I'm using off-camera flash, the Pro Photo lights and things like that, you have to have wireless on. And red eye reduction is not relative because I'm not in the JPEG mode. White balance, you can set your white balances through here. There's auto, there's daylight, shade, cloudy, incandescent, and then you have these fluorescent settings that you can actually use. White balance for flash. This, I think it's underwater auto. Kelvin, it can be quite handy too, so you can just sort of come in and then dial your white balance in, as you see through here. You can also, if I come back over, you can also do custom settings which you can save. The set button is quite good too, and I use this all the time to get white balance. If you actually go set, you'll see that you get a white circle in the center there, and as long as you've got a grey card or something that is pure white, and you just hit the center button, it will give you a perfect white balance, which is telling you it's 55K through here. It's 3100, the light in this room, so you can see that that's balanced that as well. The only thing you've got to be careful of, obviously, is if you go out to another location and you've set that, well then you've got to make sure you turn it back. Now you'll notice at the top there on the left hand corner, you can see which one you're going to set that into. You can have that custom 1, 2 or 3. So if I wanted to save it as custom 1, I can just save it there and then it's done. So that's set that white balance for this room. and I'm just going to put it back to auto. Just let me go back to here. Okay, the auto white balance on these newer Sony cameras is really good. Now your priority set in auto white balance, you can determine whether you'd like to keep that warm. See how it's brought that's your automatic white balance, standard. If you wanted to keep your warm look in this room, I can set that there. So you can see it's added that warm back. Check the difference between standard and warm. And also if you wanted to, you can also set it more to a white as well. So you can have a white sort of balance to it, or an ambi balance. So if you're in something where there's gorgeous lighting that they've set up, you can use the ambi balance to get that nice warm look in your images. Let me come back out. DRO is only related to if you were doing HDR, taking your 3 images and getting that out. You can actually set all your dynamic range and HDR images through here. To be honest, I never use them because I don't really shoot any HDR stuff. Creative style is just on standard. That's what I'm using for my normal video that I'm doing through here, and also locks that into your JPEG as well. So that's the standard type of look that I'm doing if I'm dealing with, like if you watched my last video with Kiara, that video was just shot completely with the standard profile. If I am dealing with, pitch effect won't work because I'm not in JPEG, but I never use them anyway. They're the effects that you can put on, and I just don't use them. If you were dealing with a bride in a really high contrast location and you wanted to get the highlight of the wedding dress, as well as like if you looked at that image over there where she's quite bright in that with the light coming through and streaming on her, but I also wanted to capture the background area as well, that shadow area, well then you may have to shoot in a different profile. So that's where you can actually get your picture profiles. And basically what I would do, and I haven't even set this up yet, I think I did, but I would go to this and basically I'd use PP2 and I just use gamma of sine 4, and the color mode is S gamut. The only other thing that I changed through here is the detail. I put in there -7, so that's the settings that I use for that. So that's if I am shooting, and that's the only thing I ever use. Okay, so that's the picture profile. Like I said, I'll only use that if I'm dealing with quite high contrast in the image. That's a flatter profile, and obviously there's a lot more editing that you need to do if you do that. The reason why I'm using PP2 is because the sine 4, you don't have to raise the ISO up so high. If you're using the log profiles, the ISO will start a lot higher. I think it's 800. So I prefer to just not use ISO that's that high. And the sine 4 I found with the gamut color mode is a really nice profile that is nice and flat, and I don't have to raise that ISO too much. Let's go on to the next one. Focus magnifier I use all the time. The focus magnifying time I just say no limit because I don't want it to turn off. And the initial focus, you can choose whether you'd like 5.9 times or just 1 times. All right, so if I go down to manual focus, and if I look at here, you'll see that that's the initial magnification that has come up. So the second that I press the actual focus ring, that's the initial focus that I can then set. Okay, so let's look at focus peaking. So focus peaking, if you are shooting manual, if you put focus peaking on, you just get red lines that come around your areas that are in focus, and you can determine how much how strong it is with high, medium, and low. You can also pick the color of that peaking as well. So that's always available too. I usually don't even put that on because I've found that the focus magnifier is enough in itself to get the correct focus. So yeah. So let's now move on to the next area. Anti-flicker shooting, you can turn that on if you are getting flickering in your images. You could obviously turn that on. So if you're seeing, say, LCD lights or something like that were flickering, you can turn that on, and hopefully it will get rid of that. Face registration, you can register faces, and I use this in weddings all the time. And basically what that will do, I'll just register the bride and the groom, and you just put the dialer box around them. If I went in, you'll see new registration. I haven't got a face in here close enough to actually do it, but if I did do it, it's very easy. Just put a box around the face, click on it, and that registers that face. Then you can change the order of the faces as well. The top one is obviously a priority. And if you say register faces priority on, it will obviously look at the faces that you've registered and pick them out of a crowd first. And so usually if we're dealing with this face registration, when I do the order, I'll have the bride first and then the groom second. So let's move on. File format in video is, you can choose here whether you want to shoot 4K, XAV-C HD or AV-C HD. Record format setting, that's where you can choose your like 25p or your 50p or whatever you'd like to choose through those settings as well. I'm not going to go through that in this video. I'll go through that in another time. S&Q settings is where you can change your slow motion. That is really handy to use to record, say, 100 frames per second or 120 if you're in the US. You can go into there and do really good slow motion. You can see that it's saying it's 4 times slow motion. And using S&Q, you actually see that it's baked into the file, so you don't have to slow that down in the editor. Proxy recording, if you've got a machine that's not fast enough to edit the original files, you can actually record proxies at the same time. Again, I'm not going to go into that. AF drive speed, you can actually have as fast, normal and slow. If you're dealing with things like sports and stuff like that, you could have it as fast. If you would want it to be really slow, well obviously then you could use slow. I usually generally leave it on normal. If you were doing sports, so you could have it on something like fast. There's track sensitivity, depends on responsive or standard, and what that is how fast it moves into focus, and I like it being sort of a bit slower to sort of come into into focus, so I'll leave it on standard rather than responsive. Auto slow shutdown I'd never use because that's changing the exposure if you go into darker areas and stuff. I just like to do all this manual. Audio recording, obviously, I'll leave on, and the audio level display I'll leave on as well, so you can see that on the monitor. So let's keep going. Audio timing out is just live. You can have lip sync, I just leave it on live. Wind noise reduction I turn off. Marker displays, you can have things like your crop marks actually showing, so you can see that on the screen, so you can actually do your framing correctly. And inside marker settings, you can turn things like, if you want, say, a center point and show the aspect ratio and safety zone and things like that. I'm not going to go through those at the moment. Video light mode is if you're dealing with the Sony lights and stuff like that. Movie with shutter I use on all the time because I do use the shutter button to start the movie recording. Here you can choose silent shutting, whether you have it on or off. And I'm going to talk about that when I do my review of the camera. Electronic front curtain shutter, sometimes you actually have to turn that off if you're dealing with high-speed sync and running the flash over 2000 in 1/2000th of a second. You have to turn that front curtain shutter off, or you get a band that shows up on the bottom of the image. Release without lens I'll leave on because I do like to do lensing sometimes where you have the lens just off the camera and I still want it to work. If you have that disabled, the camera won't work. Release without card I always disable because I don't want to be able to take a shot without the card being in there, so that's a warn. And obviously if you want to go into SteadyShot settings, you can start to adjust it for manual adjusting if you have manual lenses and things like that. Let's keep going. Zoom, these are just for JPEGs. I do always turn optical zoom on though, and that's also available for movie mode as well. You can punch in, which is a great thing to do. Now, auto review, the display auto review section here, basically I have zebra settings and I put that on to 100, so it will show the highlight zebras on an image. Live view display, I do turn that off when I'm in the studio because the live view doesn't work. If you're dealing with f8 in a studio at 1/25th of a second, you'll get a black image. So you have to turn live view settings effect off. It basically won't show you what your exposure is doing. It's great too if you're having trouble focusing as well. You can turn that setting off. Custom shoot length, I use that as shoot only display. It'll give you a display on the side of the screen telling you how many shots you've got left, particularly if you're shooting in the high speed. And auto review, you can have an auto review of your images on there as well if you like. Custom keys and all these setups I'm going to go through with you later on another video, because I'd like to show you how they're all set up. And all of this other stuff, networking too, is not relative. The only other thing that I'll show you is the gamma assist is if you're doing the log profiles, you can turn the gamma off or on, so you can actually get a better representation of what the exposure looks like on the screen. Display quality, I always choose high, and power save start time will be after 1 minute. It actually starts to turn the power off. Auto power off temperature means I set that on high so it doesn't shut down if it gets hot as quickly. Touch operation I have on because I do like to use the touch screen. And touch panel here, if you want to use the actual back screen as well as the EVF, you have to put on touch plus pad. So that's what that does. There's nothing else really that's relative in any of these. The only other thing I change here is the set file name I make to a7iii, so I know it's different to the other cameras. And copyright info, I do put my copyright info inside there as well. Record media settings. Oh, here, the record media settings, you actually can, I've got slot 1, which is RAW plus video, and slot 2 is JPEG. So that's the way I'm recording that on this at the moment. The faster card is slot 1. That's why I'm doing the RAW and the video. Slot 2 is just going to be JPEG backup. And here you can also say recording mode sort. You can have things like doing dual record if you want to do that sort of stuff. You can say auto switch media, etc. as well if you wanted to go down that way. Version is just checking what version of your firmware is, and then you can obviously reset all your settings. The only other thing that I'll talk about here is my menu. These are the settings that I've got on my menu. I've got flash compensation because I love to be able to adjust the flash from there. E front curtain shut down, you can shut that off if you are getting the banding with flashes. Live view display, I'm working the studio all the time, so I like to be able to turn live view setting display off. And S and Q settings, if I'm doing slow motion, I like to be able to just turn that into there, and then I can change the S and Q settings for slow motion, and obviously the recording function as well. I can change there for my video. The touch operation, I like to put that on because sometimes if you're dealing with using the EVF, just touching your nose onto the back of the LCD screen can it can automate the focus and you can get problems. So I like to be able to touch that off very, very quickly. So there you go.
So let me know what you thought about the settings I've used. If you've used many different settings, I'd love to know why or what your reasoning is. If you want to leave those in the comment box down below. Obviously, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe and give me a big thumbs up. And I'll see you all again soon for the next video. Bye for now.